1819 was a phenomenal year for John Keats. He, having only turned 23 the previous October, he launched into what was probably his single most productive year. And it was a year where he produced a fair number of masterpieces that we remember him by today, not least of which is a group of odes. He had grown somewhat frustrated or bored, perhaps, with the sonnet, and he was casting around and came upon a different form, one that would give him a little bit more freedom than the sonnet. He essentially adopted it from a Roman writer named Pindar and rejiggered it a little and came out with a vehicle of expression that was remarkably subtle and gave him an awful lot of flexibility within what he could do. Some of the most famous of the odes, he wrote a series of them throughout that tremendous year. Some of the most famous have worked their way in little chunks into the American or the English vernacular, let's say. Probably the most notorious or most famous of them, let's say, would be Ode to a Grecian Urn. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme, what leaf-fringed legends haunt about thy shape of deities or mortals or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loth? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on, not to the sensual ear, but, more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal, yet do not grieve. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss, forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs, how that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu, and happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high, sorrowful, and cloying, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadst thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or seashore or mountain built with peaceful citadel is emptied of this folk, this pious morn? And little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can ever return. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity. Cold pastoral, when old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain, in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know. So what's going on here? The poet is addressing a Greek urn, a piece of pottery. And the style of Greek pottery that we have is that they portray little scenes around it, and you can sit there and walk around an urn and see a variety of images that give you an idea of the values and the life of the culture of that time. And Keats, imagines doing this and addresses the urn. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time. He's addressing the urn as a work of art that is speaking to him over the centuries. It is a foster child of silence and slow time, in that it comes to us silently. There is no speech necessarily, but it is a visual medium. And slow time, it has not changed since then. It is not immune to time. It is slow time, but it lasts. It's not eternal, but its lifespan, shall we say, goes on for quite a while. This is an example of the Greek word for this would be ekphrasis, the representation of works of art in words. Not necessarily visual, but generally visual. It could also be about music, and the attempt to create or recreate that work of art through language, to sort of transpose the medium. And this whole poem is about the capability and incapability of art. It's about the limits of it to a certain degree. Towards the end, when he's going through the different scenes that are painted or on the sides of this urn, he starts to having to speculate. It gets there's a sense of incompletion. What little town by river or seashore, after seeing like a period of ritual sacrifice, the religious practices of the day, painted on the scene, and he's sitting there speculating, like, well, yeah, where all those people are there, but what does that mean? They're not in their regular town. They're not in their regular milieu. I'm not getting the full picture of it, of their lives. Maybe that's what I'm really interested in. Yeah, one day a week, maybe they're going and they're sacrificing an animal. But what's the rest of their life like? And he has to step in and start to dream about that. What little town by the river or seashore or mountain built with peaceful citadel is emptied of this folk, this pious morn. He's imagining a very lonely scene back in the village. While all these people are off doing this thing, he's haunted by this image of, well, that just means like the houses and the streets and their whole little community is right now empty, which is a somewhat spooky take on it. He's always thinking, this is Keats, he is always thinking about the shadow of death hanging over everything. The idea that everything might be fine now, but the fact that everything is fine now has its converse baked into it. Life has death within it. And so these three scenes that play out, they're the first one where you hear music, where he's talking about there is an image of music being played, and there is a love scene happening amongst the pipes and timbrels. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. The two young lovers are perhaps leaning toward one another on this image, but they cannot consummate. They cannot fulfill that desire. There is an implied consummation that you have to step in as the viewer. You have to step in and supply. You have to imagine it, but maybe it didn't happen that way. You don't know. It's a sense of frustration. It's a sense of isolation. He is finding, because he's only seeing that one little moment right there, he is again able to focus on the loneliness and the frustration of that moment before the kiss. Again, it's Keats. He's bringing his own particular background to it and dwelling on the fact that, well, yeah, they're about to kiss and embrace and experience love, but right now they're not. And that's going to speak to him in a certain way because, again, he died at 26 after being contagiously sick his entire life, and the few infatuations he had in his life were never really consummated. They were always forever arrested, let's say. They ended in stasis. Then you get more talk of music, and that third stanza almost sounds a little insistent. Almost it's drilling down for something in a kind of desperation, a kind of repetition. Oh, happy, happy boughs, thou cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu. Again, he's dwelling a little bit on the fact that, it's sort of frozen, the representation of this scene. It has trees in it, but yeah, it's fake. You can't, those trees will never lose their leaves. It will, and thus it will never have springtime. It is just dead in the way it's stuck there, out of time, let's say. And that repetition, happy, happy boughs, is it ironic? I'm not sure. It certainly seems like insistent, happy, happy boughs. I'm not sure if they mean that, if he means that purely exultantly. I don't know if he means that ironically. I don't know if he's commanding the boughs to be happy because they cannot shed their boughs, or they cannot shed their leaves. Again, shedding leaves can be a sign of death. This art is immune from death, let's say, or at least it is in slow time. But look also at how he dwells on the image of the image there of forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Well, breathing, any reference to breathing in Keats is automatically interesting because he, of course, died of tuberculosis. Breathing was very difficult for him. So right there, all breathing human passion far above. Forever young, he will not be forever young, except in the fact that, well, he died young, so maybe his memory is forever young, his soul is forever young. I'm not sure. That leaves a heart high, sorrowful, and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Those are dramatic images of illness: a burning forehead, a fever, and a parching tongue, dehydration. These are symptoms, and he was trained in medicine, so he can think that way. He's nudging up against, like, well, okay, the image I see on there, but what's the other side to that? All these people are so happy, but there's something else there. And then in the end, O Attic shape, fair attitude with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought with forest branches and trodden weed, thou silent form, There's so much silence in this. He's frustrated that this cannot speak to him. Silent form dost tease us out of thought as doth eternity. Cold pastoral, when old age shall this generation waste. He's imagining the death of his entire generation. Thou shalt remain. The urn will stay. Art will stay. His art, maybe? Maybe. Any art? Yeah. It will stay. It's in slow time. It might disintegrate over time, but time is what he's playing for here, I think. Then ours, in the midst of woe, of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know and all ye need to know. Beauty is truth and truth beauty is in quotation marks. It isn't always in the manuscript, so it's sort of a jump ball for editors. But it comes out as like this little epigram of wisdom that seems to be implied that the urn is saying that. And as the speaker, as the poet, the narrator throughout this, is speaking to the urn and trying to get answers out of it about what it's representing that the urn does not seem to want to give. The urn responds with this puzzling, enigmatic little fortune cookie. Beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. It's enigmatic. It's unanswerable. It is a kind of ideal, a reference of the ideal. All you know on earth. So there is a wisdom beyond, perhaps. But it's remote. It's an ideal that is perhaps perfect, but it is remote, unreachable, invulnerable to time, unaging, eternal. It's all of this, and it is not enough. Again, the poet has to step in again and again and again to try and supply more. The art itself doesn't get him there. There is a kind of he needs imagination. The imagination can complete the art. And so the art itself is insufficient. The art itself is almost incomplete. And so the viewer needs to step in and make it happen. The viewer who is caught in time, the viewer who is suffering, who is not invulnerable, who will die, who is not the foster child of slow time, but one who sees his time running out very quickly. He'll be dead in like 2 years here. He's frustrated. He's trying to get something out of art that perhaps art doesn't want to give. There is limitation. Ode to a Nightingale takes a very different turn. Some critics will tell you that of the major odes, each one, since they were written so closely together, generally, most in the spring of 1819, most will tell you that they are in some ways in conversation with one another, where they will emphasize different things, and one will pose a question that that another will take it upon itself to answer, and that's an interesting little comparative analysis project for anyone to jump into. Nightingale is essentially as famous as the urn. It is it comes with a fairly simple setup. Instead of just somebody who goes and sees an urn and starts looking around it and studying it and talking to it, here the setup is that the poet is perhaps ill. in bed, and here's an urn, or not here's an urn, here's a nightingale, a bird, outside his window singing. It's a very famous songbird. And just starts to, instead of addressing the urn, the poet starts to address the nightingale. And it's a remarkable little voyage that they go on, which can be read a number of different ways, but which captures something very specific about about romanticism in general, and about Keats's particular position within that tradition, and the limitations again that he sees inherent in romanticism. It is also it's notable that since the urn was a silent work of visual art, the nightingale, he doesn't see the bird, he hears the song. So we're going from the visual to the largely oral, and the rest of this poem is more about what he can't see, but what he gets from his other senses. And it's a very sensuous poem in that way. You get a real a feast of sensory input, let's say, that is not visual in nature. My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed, and leafwards had sunk. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thy happiness, that thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot, beechen green and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. Oh, for a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and the country green, dance in Provençal song and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim, and purple-stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. Fade away, dissolve, and quite forget what thou among the leaves hast never known, the weariness, the fever, and the fret, here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last gray hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despair, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Away, away, I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but on the viewless wings of poesy. Though the dull brain perplexes and retards, already with thee, tender is the night, and haply the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry fays, but here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon my boughs, but in embalmed darkness guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn, and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. No more, now more than ever seems it rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem, become a sod. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self-same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth when, sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn, the same that oftentimes hath charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairylands forlorn. Forlorn. The very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my sole self. Adieu. The fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu. Thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now 'tis buried deep in the next valley glaze. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? It's a very touching little story that he tells, a vision of hearing this bird sick in bed, dying, sick in bed, and can't get up. And so imagines flying with the nightingale and going on this little flight and experiencing all of the sensations that he's so starved for by being stuck in this sickbed all the time. But he can't stay there. He gets called back, and the sound of the word forlorn brings him back. He says it himself on an ecstasy of poetic joy, of artistic and emotional fulfillment, on the cusp of a kind of consummation. It tolls him back. The sound of that word, forlorn, brings him back and reminds him that he is still in that bed, and he's still very ill, and yes, he's going to die. It's doing so much. This is the longest of the odes, I think. It's the most fully developed, probably, and it's so much. It's not just that journey. He also says, he's imagining going on this flight with this bird, but he also makes it a double metaphor by saying, but not just on you, but on the viewless wings of poesy, on poetry. So I'm going to use poetry to transport me away from this bed. I'm going to read, and I'm going to write, and I'm going to transport myself somewhere ideal, somewhere perfect, somewhere that is not where I am right now. Somewhere that is built of sound, like poetry. And there's sound all over here. There is so much sensibility of it, or sensuousness of it, or sensualness. I'm not sure which one, but it is this remarkable, passionate experience built on sound. The song singeth, or the bird singest of summer in full-throated ease. What is somebody who has trouble breathing not able to do? Do anything full-throated and ease. His breathing is very labored, so he envies that capacity to just you sense that longing that in the poem he is writing he cannot escape. No matter how much he wants to, he cannot escape that awareness of his own mortality. But so much of the rest of it is not only sound, but there's some really great, some other great call-outs to sense. I personally love stanza 2. with the oh, for a draft of vintage, and here he's talking about taste, and I can never read this without really wanting a drink. Oh, for a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long time in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and the country green, dance and Provençal song, the sunburnt mirth. He's just, exulting in this and finding all of these other ways, more ekphrasis, of trying to describe something wonderful, an artistic expression of taste, and this the sensitive quality of it. The beating bubbles, winking at the brim, and purple stained mouth. There's just so you can feel the tingle on your mouth, and it's just so wonderful that he's able to conjure all this out of sheer imagination. And the whole thing, and that comes very early, and then the rest of the poem seems to me from there is about him kind of melting away. There's a frequent recourse to liquidity, let's say, fade away, dissolve, and quite forget. He seems to be always turning into a kind of liquid, which perhaps as somebody with a fever might feel that way from time to time. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet. He can't see. His visual sense is gone. But perhaps he can smell them. Perhaps it is, again, just a function of imagination. He can't see the flowers at his feet because he's sitting in bed, but he can imagine them there. Nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs. This is all supposed to be in great darkness, but all of the other senses are coming alive. The coming musk rose full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer's eve, all of this sensitive vitality going on around him that will not last beyond death. And he is struck by the capacity of the bird himself to survive, the art of the bird to survive. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. So he's viewing, like, okay, maybe not that particular bird, but birds in general. Their song have been heard by, how many thousands of generations of people. And the impossibility of that seems quite striking, and he seems envious of it. The ability to produce art that lasts that long, the ability to experience art and beauty and all of that. He's not going to be able to for long. It is all fading away on him. Melancholy, Ode on Melancholy, rather, is one of the shorter ones, but it gets to something very close to him. Again, you can forgive somebody who perhaps gets a little depressed from time to time. He clearly has an awful lot on his mind. The closeness of death is something that never leaves him, and the awareness of it. And so melancholy, depression, in modern parlance, is part of him. And he just considers it. No, go not to Lethe, neither twist wolfsbane tight-rooted for its poisonous wine, nor suffer thy pale forehead to be kissed by nightshade, ruby grape of Proserpine. Make not your rosary of yew-berries, nor let the beetle nor the death moth be your mournful Psyche, nor the downy owl a partner in your sorrow's mysteries. For shade to shade will come too drowsily and drown the wakeful anguish of the soul. But when the melancholy fit shall fall, the sudden from heaven, like a weeping cloud, that fosters the droop-headed flowers all, and hides the green hill in an April shroud. Then glut thy sorrow on a morning rose, or on the rainbow of a salt sand wave, or on the wealth of globed peonies, or if thy mistress some rich anger shows, imprison her soft hand and let her rave, and feed deep, deep upon her peerless eyes. She dwells in beauty, beauty that must die, and joy, whose hand is ever at his lips, bidding adieu, and aching pleasure nigh. Turning to poison while the bee-mouth sips, aye, the very temple of delight, veiled melancholy has her sovereign shrine, though seen of none save him whose strenuous tongue can burst joy's grape against his palate fine. His soul shall taste the sadness of her might, and be among her cloudy trophies hung. So here we have an awareness of the inevitability of life's opposites. The melancholy that so gets him down is still a sign of his life, and he can't necessarily have one without the other. In the beginning, he is essentially contemplating suicide, or at least a kind of inebriation that would perhaps be like death, drugs to alleviate the pain, perhaps. That yearning to, as he puts it, drown the wakeful anguish of the soul. If he could just sleep through all the pain, it would be better. But would it? The second stanza seems to take that up and consider that, well, no, that's not necessarily better, because the best things are sometimes those moments that are most ephemeral, that fostered the droop-headed flowers all, and hides the green hills in an April shroud. Then glut thy sorrow on a morning rose, or on the rainbow of the salt sand wave, or on the wealth of globed peonies, or if thy mistress some rich anger shows, imprison her soft hand and let her rave, and feed deep, deep upon her peerless eyes. Grab life where you can, in quick snatches if need be, but those little frozen moments are precious. And it's kind of heartbreaking again that since he died after such a short and contagious life in quarantine, he never really had a romantic relationship. And so when you see him, imprison her soft hand and let her rave, he would kill for that opportunity to imprison her soft hand and hold her so that she couldn't get away. But they always do, and feed deep, deep upon her peerless eyes. Deep, repetitive, showing desperation. And in the end, he personifies his melancholy, his depression, as a kind of goddess figure, semi-divine or a priestess. Veiled melancholy has her sovereign shrine. A bizarre little religious characterization there. Though seen of none save him whose strenuous tongue can burst joy's grape against his palate fine. which is a very sensual, sexual image to burst a grape against your palate. It's another image of sexuality, and it's significant, I think, that the most potent sexual image in the poem comes right at the end. So again, opposites. Sexuality, the joy of it, that sense of the bursting grape seems almost orgasmic, and it comes right before the end. The joy is absolutely inseparable from the pain, from the end, from death. It is in this, I mean, beauty, he addresses beauty, he addresses joy, he addresses life itself, and they're all ultimately ephemeral, and they turn into their opposites. Beauty becomes somewhat ugly over time. Joy inevitably leads to or is coupled with sadness, and life ends in death. These cannot be separated. And this knot seems to be frustrating and somewhat sustaining for him. He's dwelling on this this paradox quite a bit, and it does take you to perhaps a certain Zen place where you can accept pain, because, well, with pain, it means that you are open to joy, perhaps, and there's that sense of communion between the two. The questions these poems raise, all of the Odes, and really all of Keats and all great art, period, are ultimately irresolvable. They are complex. They are mysteries to be pondered and picked apart. And Keats explicitly tries to do this. He doesn't want easy answers. He very famously coined the term negative capability. In writing a letter to his brothers, he was talking about art and poetry, and specifically the poet Coleridge. But he keyed in on the capacity of art to stir up unresolvable questions and leave the reader or the viewer or the audience for the art in a kind of uncertainty, so that they need to supply a little, they need to buy into the process. He called it specifically negative capability: when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after facts and reason. Which is the Romantic era impulse reacting against the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment heralded reason and tried to downplay any sense of the irrational or any mystery. A mystery was something that needed to be explained or was dismissed as, oh, well, we don't know, so we're not going to bother with that. And here you have Keats as perhaps the single greatest romantic poet, leaning in and saying, no, you can't ignore that. The mysteries are what make it worthwhile. The mysteries give meaning to everything we do know, because we have all of these pairs of opposites, and to shed one from the other renders them both null. You can't evade, you can't outrun life's mysteries. And even when that fact references your own death, Keats seems to have accepted that.